Hello, it's Philip Taylor speaking from Richmond Green Chambers in London, and this afternoon looking at a small hardback book from Wildey, Hill and Simmons Publishing, which is on energy law. It's called Renewable Energy from Wind and Solar Power. It's the law and regulation therewith, written by William Webster, who's an expert in this area. There's a foreword by Lord Justice Lindblom, which is well worth reading right at the beginning. I've given the title of this short review a highly topical book on current energy law issues. Now, as I actually wrote this review and are doing this presentation, we actually are in the height of a probable energy crisis in the UK. It's in the autumn of 2021. The book was written earlier this year, but we're looking at the moment at a severe problem of petrol shortages on forecourts, and we're also looking at big increases in energy costs, big hikes in the costs of gas and so forth. So therefore, it's come about at an interesting time. Let's look at the book first of all. Hardback, green cover, very good green cover, nice solar wind there. Of course, we've had a problem this summer, not very much wind. There's the spine, and then there's quite a lot on the back, which you may be able to see a bit of. As I say, we have had, with the wind turbines, you see it on the back of the one, we did think that might help, but of course, if you don't have any wind, you don't get any electricity, which could be a problem. Now, page numbers are in the index are actually there. They're not by any other way. In other words, paragraph number is page number. You should be able to find what you want. It's a good index. I looked at it and I thought, yes, this is quite easy. References are to page numbers. It's running to 300 pages on the book. Very much the house style of Wildey. Always very grateful to Mr. Riddick and his staff and all the people at Wildey, Mr. Hill as well, because I'm really very pleased that they produce these excellent books. There's a bit of blurb about the book, then the contents section. Obviously there's a preface and then there's the introduction. You can see the various chapter headings running through. There's a lot of detail about planning and so forth, looking at the various parts that make up the UK. Wind farms, very useful item there. Case studies, and then we're getting a lot of information again. Various case studies, a lot of case studies in fact all the way through. There are 10 chapters, then there's an index at the back. The preface of course is well worth reading, which sets out that the book was written in the 6-month period before the first lockdown in March 2020, so it's pre-COVID, but obviously we've had a lot of change since then. It looks back to 2019 and a few problems. Mr. Webster is a barrister at 3 Paper Buildings Temple. Then you've got the foreword by Lord Justice Lindblom, which is a relatively short one, written in August 2020, so it's a while ago, a year ago. And then they've got a list of abbreviations. Then you've got, you see, a lot of abbreviations in energy law. Some of it's quite difficult to understand. You can't memorise it all, so it's useful to have the list. Table of cases, a few very interesting cases. Then the statutes. And after that, you've got statutory instruments. Not a lot of that either, but a few. The EU material, we've still got that. Oh yes. And other material as well. And then after that, we get to the introduction. You can see the structure of the book there. Chapter 1, the scope of introduction, climate change, and then some footnotes. And you can see there's a bit of paragraph numbering all the way through, and running through you can see there's a little bit of footnoting, but not too much as we go through. Of course, there is in November the COP26, and obviously the issue of climate change is very much at the top of the political agenda and will remain there. So this is a timely book, and one which I think people should read, irrespective of what sort of law they're going to practice, because it depends very much on what you do as a practitioner, but you could well find yourself with a planning application or a planning issue or an environmental issue, and you might find this book of interest, because renewable, sustainable energy sources are a big thing for the future. What we have here, though, is Barrister William Webster. He's an expert in planning and land law. And so Renewable Energy from Wind and Solar Power is a book which sets out the law and regulation relating to electricity generation in the case of the two most popular sources of energy derived from renewable resources. That's wind and solar. It covers up-to-date national policy, as at basically almost a year ago now, both policy and guidance which are relevant to electricity generation collected from renewable resources. Now, as I said before, when this book was published, we were making assumptions. We've had a period where there's been very little wind in the UK, so therefore the wind power generation has been much lower than was forecast. That's caused a few problems, together with other international problems concerning the supply of energy. What the author does here, though, without going into that part of it, is with the book itself, he gives coverage of the powers of local planning authorities and of the Secretary of State. That's, of course, for the business department, because energy is now in the business department as well, just to point that out, along with the devolved powers which have been given to, of course, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. And it deals with onshore and offshore projects. Now, it depends on your point of view. I've never really liked wind farms and these dreadful turbines. That's my own personal view. However, I recognise that other people love them. It's not something for me, I have to say. The book also examines the impact of nationally significant infrastructure projects under the 2008 Act. And we are moving ahead. As the century develops, we are moving very much ahead with what we're going to be doing with energy law probably in the next 40 years, because we've got a lot of goals which this government in this country and other countries have set to try to deal with climate change and the reduction in carbon levels. So what the book does here, it also covers consents granted under sections 36, that's onshore and offshore wind generation, and 37, overhead lines, of the Electricity Act 1989, that's an oldish act, and the grant of FIBA licences from the Marine and Fisheries Agency in the case of offshore consents. And again, as I say, that is controversial to a certain extent, depending on your point of view. The availability of financial assistance for the generation and export of renewable energy to the grid is also dealt with, and the book outlines in useful detail the basic technology involved in wind and solar power. And I think that will be helpful for those who are probably not so familiar with how the process actually works. What we've got here is the energy planning regime being examined in some detail through a series of case studies. Those are ones which are listed throughout the book. We see that right at the end when I show the book again. We look at a number of recent decisions from the courts and from the Secretary of State, from inspectors and reporters, involving specifically wind and solar energy proposals. Let me conclude by saying that we consider the book will be an invaluable resource as a reference material for lawyers and advisors, that's planning professionals as well, and operators in the relevant sectors of the energy industry. And also, of course, be of general interest to others in showing how rapidly the industry is developing and of the regulatory processes involved in securing consents for the commercial development of energy from wind and solar power. And as you probably gathered, the book is dated for publication 29th of April 2021. Obviously the pandemic has taken part of the time away, and I'm recording this in the late summer. Here's the book again, a hardback. Wildy have come up with a really good book here, I think. Just opening it in the middle, let's just see what we've got. We've got a case study on wind power, for instance. In the middle of the book, page 173, we're looking at a case study 21 it's actually called, about wind power. And it looks very much at the issues concerning that particular... Let me just show you. There is the case study itself. Runs all the way through, so you've got a heading about what it's about. There's a reference number and so forth. And it sets out what has happened. I think that's really very helpful. For instance, there's another one much later, case study 4. This is on solar power. Solar farm rejected on landscape and heritage grounds. Appeals refused. So you see, we are looking at the whole, really, of the planning regime. Now, I will say one last thing, and that is that when this book came out, the government at that time, the Conservative government, had been looking at a very substantial piece of planning law reform under Mr. Jenrick. Mr. Jenrick's no longer the relevant Secretary of State, and obviously there are very substantial changes in planning, with certainly with the new Secretary of State for housing, which is Michael Gove. Now, Mr. Gove may well be, as we understand it, either reviewing or scrapping the planning bill in its old form, because people like myself and many other local people, ex-councillors, councillors, have said we don't like what's in it. But again, as I say, I think this part of the law will be looked at again in the wider scope of things by Parliament before we have the next general election, probably in 2023. So it should be in the Queen's speech later this year, and I think we'll be looking at a slightly different version of the bill, which will hopefully take some of the concerns which are much more general about planning, and basically it's not really about this area, it's about concreting over the green belt. But at the same time, you do have issues concerning what a wind farm would look like in a lovely rural setting. So you can see the arguments on both sides. Thank you anyway to William Webster and to Wildis. Very grateful to everybody concerned for producing an excellent book. Thank you. Bye-bye.